The World Ocean Day is celebrated annually on June the 8th. The initiative was proposed by Canada in 1992 and officially recognized by the United Nations in 2008. The World Ocean Day is an opportunity for mankind to appreciate the values of oceans and raise awareness of the challenges caused by global pollution and excessive seafood consumption. In Vietnam, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment held a ceremony to mark the World Ocean Day as well as the Sea and Island Week 2017 in Cà Mau Province. The event was also aimed to review the 10-year implementation of the Vietnam Marine Strategy until 2020. Vietnam's Minister of Natural Resources and Environment Trần Hồng Hà said the country has scored certain achievements but also faced major issues such as overfishing, marine ecosystem deterioration, and pollution due to economic development. The ministry is developing a master plan for marine resources until 2050 and an action plan for the 2017-2025 period to ensure sustainable development of its marine economy. Hello and welcome to Sharing Vietnam. In our program today, we'll have a conversation with Mr. Brian Bin, an environmental expert working with the United States Agency for International Development or USAID. He will share with us an in-depth analysis of Vietnam's marine resources and necessary measures to protect the marine ecosystem. So hello Brian, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
First of all, how do you describe the significance of Vietnam's marine resources?
Yeah, Vietnam is quite fortunate to have tremendous ocean maritime resources. In fact, Vietnam's maritime ocean area is actually larger than its land area. And so that contains a lot of mineral, fisheries, coral reefs, different types of resources that provide a tremendous range of benefits for the country and the people who live here.
In your opinion, what are the major negative impacts of Vietnam's economic development on the marine ecosystem so far?
It's a tremendous challenge, and we've seen it in different sectors on land-based, whether it's forestry or agriculture, and now seeing more in oceans as well. It's a tremendous economic resource, and so as you use that resource, as you develop that resource, you are potentially vulnerable to negative impacts. So whether that's pollution from industry, pollution from incredibly high volume of tourists who are traveling and visiting some of these beautiful places, and also impacts from overfishing. And so some of the impact we see is reduced fish populations, increased pollution, and how all of that can negatively impact livelihoods of coastal people living and working in Vietnam.
And how do you describe the cost of the negative impacts?
You know, it's hard to quantify some of the impacts, whether it's chemical spills and fish kills that we've seen in the last year in Vietnam. Those have a very negative immediate impact, and so there's dollar value that can be placed on that for that moment in time. But the reality is that impact continues over time. So there's still fishing bans in some places because the health of that environment has not increased. So over time, we're seeing an even higher negative cost of those types of events and those types of problems. So it's hard to quantify because those costs actually keep increasing.
What do you think of the achievements and shortcomings of Vietnam's measures to protect the marine ecosystem in recent years?
I think, like I said, there's been tremendous progress. There's some great examples. There's a new coastal forest decree that the Prime Minister signed late last year, which has made much clearer how to manage coastal forest areas, including mangroves, which move into the oceans and are a valuable source of habitat for fisheries. And so that will help provinces, that will help local communities better manage those coastal resources. So there's been great progress. The challenges are how to communicate that new policy to district and commune officials so that they can effectively implement it. And then the other major challenge is how to work across sectors. One of the challenges of coastal management, of marine management, is that even things that are happening upland in agriculture, in forestry, happening far out at sea in terms of shipping and other things, all of those come together, and the pollution, the negative impacts all collect in the ocean. So you can't necessarily just address one of these areas. They're actually all coming together. So it takes a very comprehensive and integrated approach, and that will take some time and hard work.
In celebration of the World Ocean Day 2017, the United States Embassy in Hanoi held a workshop and film screening with the participation of Vietnamese and international specialists, along with young people. The specialists presented analysis of urgent issues for Vietnam's marine environment, particularly overfishing and plastic waste disposal. Vietnamese authorities say the country's fishing volume jumped from 672,000 tons in 1990 to 2.6 million in 2014. In addition, Vietnam is one of the world's top 5 countries in terms of plastic waste disposal to the ocean, along with China, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Sri Lanka. It takes up to 400 years for plastic wastes to decompose, which results in the fact that those wastes now make up 90% of trash on the oceans around the globe. The wastes cause death to many sea animals and pose a serious threat to human health.
Tôi nghĩ rằng là hiện nay thì Việt Nam đang là một nước phát triển và phát triển rất nhanh. Tuy nhiên là nếu như chúng ta không nghĩ đến cái tương lai lâu dài mà cái môi trường mang lại cho chúng ta, thì rồi một ngày nào đó với những cái lợi ích mà kinh tế mang lại nhưng mà chúng ta mất đi cái môi trường thì lúc đấy chúng ta phải trả giá rất cao. Cho nên tôi nghĩ rằng là cái việc mà thực thi những cái luật là phải được đặt lên hàng đầu, những cái luật về bảo vệ môi trường, bảo vệ nguồn lợi là phải được đặt lên hàng đầu. Bởi vì luật chúng ta có rất nhiều luật hay và nghe có vẻ là sẽ giải quyết được vấn đề. Nhưng cái khâu quan trọng nhất là cái khâu mà phải thực thi những cái luật đấy thì nó lại có thể nói là nó rất yếu, hoặc nhiều luật là không hề được thực thi. Cho nên những cái luật như thế nó ra nó chưa thực sự là có tác động đến cái môi trường biển và mang lại đúng cái ý nghĩa, cái mục đích ban đầu của cái luật đấy.
At the workshop, Vietnamese and international specialists shared different measures to preserve marine resources and reduce pollution. Some measures include collecting garbage, especially at coastal areas, establishing natural reserves, and sharpening penalties.
Are there now fish ponds that have been put in? Where are there still?
We need to change people's behavior, and that means putting in measures, both policies, sanctions, incentives. So I gave the example, for example, of starting to charge for a plastic bag. In other countries in Europe, the only bags you're allowed to, the only trash you can have taken away comes in a certain size bag that you have to buy, and that makes you think very carefully before you throw rubbish out because you have to pay for another bag. The other thing would be to put in place a recycling program, so you separate rubbish, whether it's metals or plastics or glass or organic rubbish at source in the households.
What are your suggestions for Vietnam to develop its marine economy in a sustainable way?
I think the two most important considerations are actually two of the most difficult things to do. The first is, as I just mentioned, finding ways to look at integrated coastal zone management, to look at integrated maritime management, to understand some of the different impacts from these different sectors, because it's not just one thing. So we have to have a real comprehensive approach. The second thing is to be able to have the vision and the foresight to look at a long-term strategy. Oftentimes, political decisions, oftentimes economic decisions are made on short-term returns. And so if there's a resource, such as a fishery resource, to try to get as much from that as possible. But in reality, we have to have a very longer-term vision to be able to see how that can be managed now, managed for the future, managed for our children and the future economy of Vietnam as well. And it's difficult to have that kind of patience and vision, but that's what will allow for a real sustainable solution.
Could you share some useful lessons from the United States in managing marine resources?
Sure, I think there's a couple very high-profile examples from the United States, looking mostly at fisheries. So there's different species. There's Atlantic cod, and then there's also blue crab. And both of those fish populations were greatly reduced because of overfishing. And so a strong policy was put in place to eliminate no fishing could take place for that species for a period of time. And the blue crab especially has returned very quickly. I think one of the key lessons is that that didn't take just a policy. It also took in dialogue, it took communication and coordination with fishermen and people who were involved in that, because that was significantly impacting their livelihoods. So the government had to not only come up with a policy, but had to come up with subsidies that could support those fishermen for those 2 years, for example, that they weren't able to fish. So there's a cost to that. But again, in the long run, having that long-term vision allowed the fish populations to come back up and have a very sustainable solution.
Could you share with us some major results of your program in Vietnam so far?
Some of the greatest successes that we've had have been in terms of mobilizing communities to take ownership of their own planning and their own management of a resource, working closely with local government and other stakeholders such as businesses that are in their community. So we've done disaster planning, coastal disaster planning, looking at issues like storms, storm surge and flooding from the sea in 60 communes in Nam Dinh and Long An provinces. And so those 60 communes now have disaster preparedness plans in place that they've been able to develop themselves. And then the second is we're working right now in 3 communes in Haiphong province to do a participatory mapping project so that fishermen, local government, and communities can actually use modern technology to map out where they're accessing fish, where they're getting clams, where they're getting other things, where they can protect mangroves. And what that does is it gives the community and the government a very clear picture of what's happening, helps them look at what's happening now, have an idea of what they want to do in the future, and then create a clear plan for how best they can do that.
And finally, what is the plan for your program to further operate in Vietnam in the coming years?
We have been working with American Red Cross and Vietnam Red Cross as very close partners in working to implement this community-based disaster risk management process. The government of Vietnam, working with our program and other partners, identified some very positive models that could be institutionalized. And so there's Decision 1002, which has set a standard for community-based disaster planning across the country. And so based on input from our program and a number of other important activities, this is now the model for how community-based disaster planning will be done throughout Vietnam. And so we're happy to be a part of continuing to support that process to improve those coastal communities and their ability to prepare for disasters.
Well, Brian, thank you very much for joining us today and sharing valuable information.
Well, thank you very much. I hope to have a chance to speak with you again soon.
Well, that's all for our Sharing Vietnam today. Thank you very much for watching and see you again next time.